we would talk about trust. Can we get these things so they're not in front of the computer screen? Thanks. Okay, thank you. Let's discuss trust. What is trust? Non-rhetorical. I'm actually asking you guys, what's trust? You know, the very fact that you all speak English means you know what the word trust means because you use it regularly. Shh. Because you use it regularly. So, you should all be able to answer the question. As English speakers, you should know what the word trust means because it's part of your vocabulary. Yeah.
Knowing you can count on them.
Knowing you can count on someone.
Yeah.
Sure. That's good. That's good. Look at that.
English.
Huh?
English.
Yeah, you know English. See that? Like the rest of y'all, he knows English. Excellent. So trust is a feeling or an understanding or a knowledge that you can trust, that you can count on someone. Good. More? I almost used the word in the definition, which doesn't work. You guys can repeat that. Yeah.
The belief that someone has your best interests at heart.
The belief that someone has your best interests at heart adds another element to what the gentleman in the blue sweatshirt said. What's your name? Bryston. Bryston mentioned counting on somebody. Well, you could pay somebody and based on their professionalism, you could count on them. Also, in social sciences, you get into, they define trust with strangers. This is the amount of trust you have in strangers. For instance, you might ask somebody what time it is, and you count on them accurately giving you the time. There's no reason to doubt them. If you're raised in a situation where you have parents who betray your trust or early attachment figures that betray your trust, you might actually not trust strangers. For most of you, just statistically speaking, your trust in strangers is, relatively decent. When do we make that bench? Is that new? Huh? Oh, cool. There's stranger trust, there's out-group trust, that's trust in other communities, there's in-group trust. These are endogamous and exogamous relationships you have with your own people and relationships you have with other people. And there's neighbor trust, people you share space with. Those are usually, if you get into how trust is studied in psychology and social science, they'll make these distinctions. So you might have a trust in somebody doing right by you or being honest with you or being able to count on somebody for something. But then Madhav introduced a new element, which is there's a sense in which you feel that the person has your best interests at heart. Therefore, in addition to the behavioral component that Bryston defined, what Madhav defined was a cognitive component. You could count, for instance, based on Bryson's definition, if that's all that we did, you could say you place your trust in a machine. because the machine was properly constructed and you thought that it would do its job. Therefore, you could count on that machine to do its job. And certainly we do this. We fly up in the air in like little tinfoil containers because we trust in these machines with our lives. Think about it. Some guy got arrested up in the Bay Area recently, an Indian guy, for driving the backseat of his Tesla. Just put Tesla on autopilot and just drove home in the backseat of his Tesla and was on his phone, surfing his phone. Cops pulled him over. He was unapologetic. Just based solely on my own experience and extrapolating from my own experience, I would assume that he was not born in India. Because if you're born and raised in India, there's a certain fear of police officers and their ability to abuse you, like at will, without consequence. It gets in your bones if you spend enough time in India. The police in India enjoy almost like no repercussions. They can just beat you publicly and it's no big deal. We've of course got the same problem in the US to some extent. We regularly get, like police officers just killed some guy in, what was it? Louisiana. And the guy said, I can't breathe. And they said, you're not supposed to be able to breathe, punk. And then he died. They'll have a big civil settlement. It'll be like tens of millions of dollars for his family. But the grand jury refused to indict. He was like begging for his life in a post-BLM world where people are supposed to listen up when you talk about somebody saying they can't breathe. And they like a couple weeks ago, whenever it was, a month ago or something like that, they're on camera saying you're not supposed to be able to breathe. And like berating him as he was dying. So it still happens in the U.S. You go across the border, and it's like, if you're recording it, they'll kill you too. Just like 150 miles over there. 150 politicians were killed in Mexico last year. Wrap your head around that one. Like politicians get out of line and they just assassinate them. That's just over the border. It's like closer than Bakersfield. In India, police enjoy almost like unlimited freedom. I'm looking for somebody born in India. You were born in India, right? Yeah. You know what I'm talking about? Everyone's scared of police officers. You know? I'm like, somebody stole one of our devotees' computers at the Delhi temple. And so, the Hare Krishna movement is we're pretty darn mainstream in India. If you look at the Hare Krishna movement in India, governors, prime ministers, big players invite us to be their priests at their inaugurations and stuff like that. It's a big deal. We're feeding tens of millions of people vegetarian food every day. Huge government contracts to do that because we subsidize it with donations. So it's this incredibly advantageous partnership for the government because for a couple of pennies, they get meals because we subsidize the meals because it's part of our outreach. We have hospitals. And so, even some devotees, initiated devotees are low, medium level politicians, but even big politicians, even the prime minister is a fan. Especially because the BJP, I don't want to get into Indian politics, but there's a real Hindu nationalist party which is currently in vogue in India, and so we're especially well regarded. Anyway, somebody stole a devotee's computer, and so they called the police, and the police just came down there and just started beating taxi drivers. Just like no due process, just pulling people out of taxis and just beating them. They have these lattis. You ever been hit by a latti? You know what a latti is?
Stick with a metal cap on the end.
They don't have a metal cap on the end. It's a very thin bamboo long stick that oftentimes is a little flexible on the end. So when you hit somebody with it, it whips. I've been hit by lattis. They hurt. Break the skin. And so they just started hitting people, smacking people around. Nobody knows anything until they just start beating people up, and then all of a sudden the computer appeared like 20 minutes later. I'm not supporting this. I'm not saying I'm not in favor of this. But it's like they're in that phase of evolution of policing. Maybe where the U.S. was, I don't know, however many years ago. 40 years ago, something like that. This was in Delhi too, so in major cities. And just openly on the street, unapologetically. Get out your cell phone, record it, no problem. Anyway, this guy said, I refuse, I'm going to do this again tomorrow. It's safer to have my Tesla drive me than for me to drive personally. He was looking for the news attention. He was all about it. And it was just too American, It's like an American ethos. It's in his bones. And so I'm just opining he was born in the U.S. despite his super Indian name. I heard that and I was like, oh, this is a guy who was born here. A Madhav, a Govind. Even you guys, your family was so village. Your parents were so village. Your dad's a farmer from Maharashtra. And so even though you got raised in Southern California, you're a little bit more Indian than you know what I mean? You right? You feel that way, don't you? You're like not an A, B, C, D. You're a little more of something in between. A, B, C, D stands for American Born Confused Deshi. Deshi is someone who's a native of Desha, which means land. Bideshi is someone who's a native of Badlands, which is the xenophobia of Indians. Bideshi is like a derogatory word used to refer to everybody from everywhere else in the world except for India. They have a term for that. It's like their version of Goyim for the Jewish amongst us. And so it's a xenophobic term that has a very negative connotation. Right, Braj Kamud? He said Bideshi. What did he say? You don't know if it's negative? To call someone a Bideshi?
No, I don't know if the word is used in a negative context.
For sure it is. For sure it is. You know this?
I didn't know this.
You didn't know this? Jeez, man. I got to educate you guys. Yeah. So I think he was born in the U.S. Anyway, back to trust. If our definition of trust was Bryston's definition of trust, then you could say, I trust a machine. Can you say that? Can you say, I trust this machine? Of course you can. We use that. We use trust in that way all the time in English. But when we talk about trust in interpersonal relationships, in the social sciences, we mean trusting other people. And so then in addition to having confidence in the ability of something to perform, which was Bryson's definition, which is a behavioral definition. A machine can behave properly. You can trust the fancy tinfoil can to not kill you when you travel in the air. But then Madhav brought up a cognitive component of trust. That you believe the other party has your best interests at heart. That's an important element of trust. And so just like most reasonably well thought out definitions, thank you. Just like most reasonably well thought out definitions, there's a cognitive and a behavioral component when you're looking at psychological phenomena. There's usually a cognitive and a behavioral element at play. So although we use the word trust in English in any number of ways to mean any number of different things, when you look at this as social phenomena and interpersonal relationships, you trust it, you have confidence in someone's abilities, and you also have confidence in their good intentions. Interestingly, if people fail you, it's easier to forgive them if you can chalk up their betrayal as being incompetence. Think about it. I'm not making this up on the spot either. If you read the literature, this is what it says. And if you just think about it for a minute, you'll realize, oh yeah, that's really true. If somebody fails you and betrays your trust, and you can chalk it up to incompetence, it's easier to forgive them. You don't forgive them, you excuse them. When you excuse somebody, it means you realize they couldn't do any better. They were just incapable, they were incompetent. You can pardon somebody, that means you legally forgive them for their crimes. You can reconcile with somebody, which is a restoral of trust. You can forgive them, which is you give up bad feelings and you have better, more munificent feelings towards them. Although you may not trust them again, that's a reconcile. You can condone their behavior, it means you determine that they didn't do anything wrong. You can forget about it, which means you just don't remember it. But it's much easier to excuse somebody for poor behavior if you can chalk it up to incompetence, because it means that they were well-intentioned. If somebody was competent but they still betrayed you, that's tougher to recover from, because it shows that they're not your well-wisher. It's a cognitive lacking. Trust is usually defined as when a trustor, that's the person who is doing the trusting, entrusts the trustee, that's the person who is being trusted, with taking care of something, and they cede control over to that person, either voluntarily or involuntarily. You can be forced to trust somebody by circumstance. You can use the word in that way. I want to focus more on the voluntary trusting today. But there's nothing wrong with saying, I trust the airplane's going to perform. That has nothing to do with interpersonal relationships. And there's also nothing wrong with saying, I'm forced to trust in the process. Even though you don't believe it's going to work in your favor, you have no choice. So there are involuntary trusting relationships that exist. I don't want to focus on those. I want to focus on voluntarily trusting relationships and their cognitive and behavioral components and how important they are for social mammals, and especially for human beings. I mean, just from a survival point of view, you got to sleep. And when you're sleeping, you're largely defenseless. And so you got to trust other people to tend the fire, to keep their eyes peeled. There's almost no version. We had that thing. I had to trust you, remember? I didn't have to trust you. I did trust you. Howard's an ex-police officer. And he's like super well trained in the fine art of violence. Right, Howard? And so there's been times where things have gone down. I've had to like have you watch my six because things were going bad. Remember that thing in India with that guy who was messing with my daughter? You had my back on that one. While Ross cowered in the vehicle. He came out. Ross came out. But Howard was out there quick. I didn't even ask you to come out. I just went out there and to argue with a gang of thugs, and you were out there. Yeah, the situation was evolving. You wanted to make sure I had some support. Yeah. And you came down too, didn't you? No. You came down, right? You were there, right? Good times. There's just no way to live in this world without trusting people. Stuff happens. You need people to have your back. That's why I like all my friends to learn the lost art of violence and lift weights, at least all my male friends, so if things go down, it's not just on me, because a bunch of peace-loving Hare Krishnas cowering in the corner. I have to give class and be the bouncer. I can give people a look and have them jump up and take care of things, and then I can play the role of the priest and not be doing double duty. And then if I'm giving you the lowest level on which you got to trust people just to survive in this world, in a dog-eat-dog kind of world, in a law of the jungle kind of world. But my mom's selling her house right now. We're setting up a trust for her, and we have to name a trustee. That's the whole legal side of trust, and we have to name a trustee who then, takes care of the trust and adjudicates the money. And then in a legal situation, you have a trust protector. You guys know about this? Google Britney Spears, you'll find all about it. Save Britney Spears. Free Britney Spears. You got to have a trust protector in case things get screwy. With a trustee, then you have somebody who can take the trustee to court and have them replaced if they're not doing their job. You got to write your trust carefully. That's a legal thing. That's involved in just very, very meticulously crafted contracts, and you're not actually depending on the person. But just in a home situation, raising children. At one point, especially with my first children, I have 6 kids. My wife and I have 6 kids together. Tyson Fury's wife is pregnant with their 6th kid. You guys know who that is? One of the best boxers in a generation. He's unbelievable. If you watch him fight, it's ridiculous. First of all, he's like 6'8" or 6'10". It's just, and that's just his. And he's big at that weight. And he's a gypsy. Can't say that anymore. He's a traveler. He's a traveler. It's the appropriate term. Do you know why the word gypsy is racist? Because Romani people aren't from Egypt. They thought they were from Egypt. And so they came up with the name gypsy to indicate that they're from Egypt. You know how you say, don't gyp me? That's another one you got to get out of your vocabulary. That's based on the idea that Romani people are naturally thieves. So don't gyp me means don't treat me like the gypsies would. Anyway, Tyson Fury is a traveler. His father's a bare-knuckle boxer. Took some guy's eye out 8-10 years ago. Went to prison for it. Did you guys know this? His dad is like named somebody for life, like recently. Because they got these blood feuds, these like gypsy blood feuds. I said it again. These, update your language. I got to update my language. They have these traveler blood feuds which go on, and they have these bare knuckle matches where they practically kill each other. It took some guys out, like actually blinded the guy for life, went to prison for it. So his son is one of the greatest boxers in a generation. How did I get on that tangent?
You both have 6 kids.
We both have 6 kids. When I had my first kid, Rukta, my oldest, who's 19 now, Rukta's legitimately a dangerous individual. He's like undefeated in mixed martial arts, state-ranked wrestler, championship in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I mean, he's a real threat on the feet, on the ground, and he never scares. Some kids just came in and stole the money from the tip jar at our restaurant today. I've had my restaurant for 7 years, and no one's ever stolen the money out of the tip jar in 7 years. It just sits there in a glass jar, stupidly. I don't know how I did that. And then somebody came in and stole it. 3 kids came in and stole it and ran off. And my son ran out of the kitchen and chased him down. Then they got away. Then they came back down the street, and he wasn't sure it was them or not. And so he ran out in the street and confronted all of them again. 3 men in the street. Which isn't like, you might think, I would do the same thing over $7. Maybe you would. Maybe you would. I would. You might. I don't know. I would, because I've done really stupid stuff like that in the past, and I don't know if I've fully learned my lesson or not. When he was a kid growing up, my wife and I never left him alone, not in our care, for the first 3 years of his life. There was never a moment in 3 years of his life where he was ever out of my eyesight or my wife's eyesight. I left him alone with my mother one time. My mother, like the most trusted person on the planet. But she went in the bathroom at our church and left him in the foyer. And I walked in, and she came out of the bathroom, and I said, "Mom, I told you." She goes, "What did I do? Take him in the bathroom?" I said, "Absolutely. Take him in the bathroom. I told you, don't take your eyes off him." And she's like, "Son, what do you want from me?" And I said, "Yeah, you're not watching my kid anymore. That's it. You're done. Canceled." The reason I did that was because I didn't want my kid to get molested. And I did the math, and I thought, how long does it actually take to molest a kid? If you get some weird, freaky pervert, and they don't do the normal grooming thing that child molesters do, and they just kind of try to grab your kid, how long does it take to molest a kid? What does it take, 10 seconds, 15 seconds? So I just decided I'm never letting my kid out of my sight until he's old enough to tell me what happened. You follow? Then my kids started watching my other kids, and then we grew our community, and people who were in my circle of trust grew also, people I knew for 10, 20 years, who really listened to me. And when I said, "Don't take your eyes off my kids," they understood what I meant. And then we started raising our family, and I had to grow that. But when you're talking about serious stuff like having a family, there's dangerous stuff out there, and you can actually drive yourself crazy. Think about all the things that could happen to your kid. You must think about this stuff sometimes, now that your wife's pregnant, right?
Yeah.
You must think about this sometimes, right? But you must think about it more, right? It'll actually keep you up at night. You kind of got to grow into it, of having somebody else's life in your hands. It's not easy. It takes a minute. It to let that weight settle on your shoulders and be able to move with it and not be paralyzed by it. Right? I know you have a little bit of anxiety you suffer from. You must have freaked out about Olive when she was like a baby, right? It's not the same for every kid. But in the beginning, you're like, what do I do? Hold the head. You know? You can see first-time parents. They're all jittery. They're not smooth. It's like somebody doesn't know how to handle a firearm or something like that. Or doesn't know how to handle a chainsaw. Cat's learning how to work a chainsaw right now. He's a fireman out for CAL FIRE, one of our devotees. And you don't know how to work a chainsaw, but you're kind of jittery with it. You don't know what you're doing. And then, as you get better and better, you can move really quickly and deftly and without making any mistakes, like you will with a firearm, like you will with a deadly weapon. You can watch how somebody deals with their kids. You learn the sound that you wake up for and the sound you don't wake up for. What you can sleep through and what you can't sleep through. Anyway, there's no way for human beings to live in this world without voluntarily placing their trust in people. And so what is trust in interpersonal relationships? It's when you become a trustor and you voluntarily cede control over to a trustee. And you have confidence in their ability and in their well-wishingness, in their munificence, in their having your best interests at heart, in their character, in their honesty. And you willingly give up control of something and allow them to manage it on your behalf. That's trust. And it's essential. In the rawest, most primatological sense, it's essential for survival. But it's also essential for child rearing and just living life and not doing everything yourself. At some point, things get big enough where you can't just do everything yourself. And you need to cultivate relationships where you can depend on people and not always be double checking every single thing they do. I'm blessed. I've got some people in my life who I can trust with my kids. And they're like, we have a thick relationship. And so when I trust them with my children, they are so hyper careful with my kids. It's ridiculous. Like, how careful are you with my kids?
Super.
Right?
Yeah.
Like more careful than you probably be with your own kids, right? You still got to educate people what you're expecting from them. It's not fair to just assume somebody can read your mind. You take the trouble to delegate properly, but at some point you got to take your hand off the reins and you got to trust somebody. And trust makes you vulnerable. Trust makes you vulnerable. Trust is always a gift. It's always a gift because you're allowing someone to move into a usually, almost always, a future tense situation where you can't control all the variables and you're depending on them to navigate those variables on your behalf with your best interest in mind competently. You follow? So you can never know because you don't know what the situation in the future is going to throw at that person that you've given control over. Did you follow that? So there's a certain sense in which when you trust somebody, you're giving them a gift. You're becoming very, very vulnerable. And you're really opening a door to your heart and you're putting yourself in their hands. If you've had bad attachment figures in your life, you guys are familiar with attachment theory? Psychology? It's pretty well proven at this point. It's still technically a theory, but it's the major theory. When children and like even mammals are born, they quickly form a relationship with an attachment figure where they want to be close to that figure at all times. They have anxiety if they're not close to that figure. They depend on that figure, and that figure becomes fundamentally like the source of stability and comfort and assuredness in their life. Like my daughter wakes up in the morning, my 3.5-year-old wakes up in the morning, and the first, like, she'll see me and I'll be like smiling there, like, hey, and she'll like immediately look for her mother. No love. I'll get like a second tier hug, but like her mom, when she sees her, she just goes like, ah. Like, mom is there, everything's okay. And so my wife is her primary attachment figure at this point in her life. If you have messed up relationships and you get abandoned by your attachment figures or betrayed by your attachment figures, it really makes it hard to trust people. Because your basic confidence in reality and the fabric of reality and people in general is affected. That's why, although most people can trust strangers on a certain level to tell them the accurate time, there are people who their go-to, their default position is to have unfounded automatic doubt in strangers, to assume the worst in all circumstances. And that's debilitating. It's debilitating. Anyway, does that give you guys a good working understanding of trust? I'll say it all now. Like, we worked through it a little bit, but I'll say it all now 3 times fast. Trust is an interpersonal relationship. It's a phenomenon which is there in many animal species, but is especially a part of human society. And it's where there's a trustor who places their confidence in a trustee and depends on their competence and their well-wishingness, and hands over voluntarily control of a situation in the future that's uncertain, and depends on that other party to navigate it for them. And trust makes you vulnerable. And it's always a gift, because there's always things you can't possibly fathom that may happen in the future. And so you really got to just give yourself over and place yourself in someone else's competent and loving hands. You follow this? And without trust, normal social dealings become incredibly difficult to navigate, because you're plagued with fear of what ifs, and they go on ad infinitum, and they'll literally drive you crazy and lead you to do things like ban your mother from taking care of your kid and never letting your kid out of your eyesight for the first 3 years of their life. And so learning the fine art of trusting is essential for progressive life. You guys with me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm liking you, Bryston.
Liking you.
Thank you, man. Appreciate that. Appreciate that. Is he one of yours? He's one of yours. Good. I'm sorry?
I like him too.
Yeah, I do too. So we're like a community all of a sudden. Honestly, that's what a community is, right? It's people with mutual trusting relationships. Starts with two people, that's a relationship, and when it starts to extend, that becomes a community real quick. High trust relationships. They're kind of everything. They enable you to move so much quicker through life, to go so much further in life, and they're really what makes life worth living. I don't want to wax too much about that, but this is important stuff. I got a couple verses from the Gita that I thought were interesting. Krishna says, Apichet su duracharo. Even if one does really bad things, bhajate mam ananyabhak, but they worship me in an unalloyed fashion. They worship me, ananyabhak means with no other object, with no other interest, unalloyed, exclusively might be a good translation to a functional translation, if not a literal one. If they worship me exclusively, undeviatingly, but of course that leads you to the question of if you were worshiping Krishna undeviatingly, then how would you have done something really bad? We'll have to deal with that in a minute. I also would broaden the scope of this, that, worship me means worshiping God. Not like specifically our sect. Thank you. Even if one does terrible things, if they worship me without deviation, sadureva samantavya, you must consider them to be good. Samyak vyavasito hisaha, because their determination is good, proper. Even if somebody does the worst things, if they worship Krishna wholeheartedly, they should be considered to be good because their determination's in the right place. Do you guys follow this? So there's a few things that have to be troubleshot in this verse right off the bat. I don't think this verse replaces a legal system. So if somebody does a terrible thing, then they should be punished according to the law. Just go ahead and just affix this onto the legal system. This doesn't mean that murderers should just be let free. It does, however, mean that everybody's redeemable and everybody can learn and everybody can grow. What about the person who's a sociopath? Well, interestingly enough, people with low levels of empathy, by caring for animals in prison, have been shown to markedly increase their capacity for compassion. Additionally, you can explain to sociopaths how it's in their best interest to do good for others. And so there are ways to rehabilitate even people with low to no empathy. There are therapeutic measures that have some success. Additionally, even if we exempt sociopaths from the equation and say that they're putting sort of a time out or they're paralyzed in this lifetime, which again I gave evidence that they're not, I still don't think it dismisses the basic value of this verse, and the exception ends up proving the rule. And of course, sociopaths wouldn't be able to worship God with their whole hearts anyway, so that fixes that one right there. So anyway, from any number of angles, you can defend this proposition against some of the more obvious attacks. Are you guys with me? I'm stating the obvious critiques and then rebutting them to save us the time. If there was more time and I hadn't gone off on so many ridiculous tangents throughout the class, we could have done this together, but I'm just moving through it for you. You should think of the person as good because they're connected to the good, and by their connection with an all-good, all-powerful divinity, they're going to receive some grace and they're going to learn and grow. Just like an unripe piece of fruit attached to a tree in due course of time will get nutrients from the sun and the roots, and it'll ripen and become edible. So it's a statement about the power of somebody connecting to divinity, the therapeutic value of connecting to divinity, the prophylactic value. Prophylaxis means purification. I know prophylactic is used for contraception, but it has a much broader meaning in English. And so the verse is a statement about the prophylactic, purifying, therapeutic value of connecting with divinity and how it transforms your life. And then Krishna says, Kshipram bhavati dharmatma. Kshipram bhavati. Quickly they are, in the present tense, quickly they are dharmatma, dharmic beings. You guys all know the word atma, right? Soul, dharma. Kshipram, quickly, bhavati, they are dharmatmas. Means they become rectified and edified so quickly that it's practically in the present tense. They become purified. Kshipram bhavati dharmatma. Shashvat shantim nigachati. And they attain forever peace, eternal peace. Kaunteya pratijanihi. Know this. Name bhakta pranashyati. That my devotee is never destroyed. So now the natural question that all of you should have, being that you guys are all supercalifragilistic, expialidocious smart, is you should all be wondering, what's this have to do with trust? What does these two verses have to do with trust? Yeah?
I feel like it represents Christ.
Hey, you got to correct everybody, man. Your whole crew calls you Darshan. Which undoubtedly is a cool name, but it is not it's not your name, young man. Your name is Darshan. Like this, you might think it's just like whatever, tomato. It's not. People say to me, I'm like, oh, whose student are you? They're like, oh, I'm Darshan. They're like, who's Darshan? Like, some guy I don't know? Who's this Darshan character I keep hearing about? This is it's become like a weekly thing for me. Because you have that many students now, and they're always telling me this. You know your name, right?
Yeah, it's either that or Dave. So.
Right, and you don't like Dave. I was going to call you Dave. I would start calling you Dave, and you ixnayed me. You said, no, I had to change it. I had you written as Dave in my phone. You're like, no, call me Darshan. So I'm like, I'll call you Darshan, but you got to get it right, man. This whole mispronunciation thing is... His name is Rodney. And then Rodney's nickname was Deuce. And then Deuce got initiated, and he became Dave Darshan. I was like, all right, Dave, we're good. And he's like, don't call me Dave. He's like, call me Darshan. So I put you in my phone as Darshan, but then everybody else is calling you Darshan. Huh? You wonder why? My brother Scott still calls my son Shekar, who will turn 18 this year. So my brother Scott, who has known Shekar for 18 years and lives in Southern California and regularly interacts with my son, calls him Shekar. And I'm like, dude, shake R, like shake, and then the letter R, shake R. How difficult is it? I've gone through that with him 50 times. He still calls me Shekar. My daughter's Shabu. He calls my daughter Shabu. Anyway, I'm sorry. Somebody just did that to me yesterday, and so it was on my mind. Forgive me. What were you going to say?
I was going to say that it ultimately represents that Krishna has trust in us.
Yeah. You heard me give class on this before?
I think I probably heard you say that before.
Do you remember me giving class on this before? Or did you figure that out just from hearing today's class? Just tell me straight.
I actually don't know.
You don't remember? That's fine. A whole class is about you trusting people, right? But I just jujitsu'd it. These verses speak of Krishna's trust in us. Krishna's going big, and he's saying, you should know this, my devotees will never fail. Krishna has that level of confidence in his devotees. That's powerful. Irrespective of what you've done, Krishna, his conviction is that you can be rehabilitated. You're basically good. It comes from our pure soul theology. The major theology of the world is a fractured soul theology, that you're fundamentally broken and that you need the vicarious atonement of another to become whole. It's a pretty unhealthy worldview, psychologically speaking. It's the worldview of 5 billion people. Islam and Christianity. Hinduism is a pure soul theology. It's the worldview of 1 billion people. And it holds that basically you're good. And irrespective of what you do, your core is good. You're fundamentally good. And you can be restored. Not through the vicarious atonement of another, but just through becoming who you really are, who you always were, who you forgot you were. Let me say that all again. The Gita's worldview, the worldview of roughly 1 billion people in the world, is that we as souls are all fundamentally pure, like water on a molecular level is pure. And if it gets flushed down a toilet with whatever, it can still be distilled and brought back to its original purity. That can be contrasted with a fractured soul theology, a fractured soul idea of self, that you're fundamentally broken and bad because Adam and Eve messed up and all of their children are forever tainted with immortal sin. And although you can be saved, your fundamental nature is broken. And your only hope is in the vicarious atonement of another. Do you guys follow this? So, Krishna's statement here is a statement of our innate purity. And of course of the salvific effects of bhakti. Just because you're innately pure doesn't mean you're going to be able to necessarily build a stairway to heaven. But this idea that if people connect with divinity and they're sincere and they open up their hearts, that's enough. It makes life really simple. Makes life really simple. Like my wife's got a skincare regime. Who's got a skincare regime? Raise your hand. You really have a skincare regime, Matt?
Yeah, I use Dermalogica.
All right, man. All right, man. More power to you. You're a little rosy, right? You're a little rosy cheeked, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought you were going to be like, I don't know, yeah, I use sunblock when I go out to the beach. Tell them about your 8-part daily regimen, your monthly facials. You can hide your facials and chemical peels 3 times a year during peel season, from October through spring, but you don't do peels in the summertime because... Anyway, so, if people have a skincare regime, it gets crazy. People have like 15 different serums, and exfoliators, and cleansers, and toners, and hydrators, and eye creams, and day creams, and night creams, and different SPF level, sun protection factor level, sunscreens. There's just, and you'll have multiples of all these things that you're doing. So sometimes companies will try to tell you, no, you need a cleanser, you need a toner, you need a moisturizer, and a sunblock. We got 4 products for you. That's it. You're good. They try to simplify it because otherwise it gets like crazy. There's all these different things you got to do. And so there's a simplicity to this verse. That life's actually really simple. There's a hack. If you focus your life on self-realization instead of sense gratification, if you water the root of the tree, focus on divinity instead of trying to water each individual leaf, if you become proficient at turning towards divinity, at factoring that into every equation of your life, if that's the purpose of your life, if that becomes your reason for existence, if that's who you are, that's enough. You can do one thing, and by doing that, do everything. There's a simplicity that theism has always promised. You can connect with the one source of all reality, and by doing that one thing, you can do everything. By watering the root, the whole tree flourishes. By feeding the stomach, the whole body is nourished. By serving the divine, everything is accomplished. There's a certain simplicity in the verse of what you need to focus on. And of course, that doesn't mean you're not, in for an interesting ride. So many things will happen, but if you have this one kind of like rule of thumb, this one heuristic, this one principle that you live by, that you factor into all equations, that principle can help you navigate through whatever life throws at you. And Krishna's saying, like, that's enough. You open that door, that's enough. I got confidence in you. I'll put my faith in you. I'll trust you. Normally we think of, how am I going to trust you? How am I going to trust God? How am I going to trust others? Of course, trusting others is eventually you got to trust God. It's like the biggest one of all. You can have an unexamined faith, just inherited from your family members, almost like a cultural phenomenon or an ethnic phenomenon, unexamined. But if you want to make it your own and you want it to be real and powerful, then you have to get to a place where you trust in divinity. In a lot of ways, all the different trusting relationships, starting with our attachment figures, are all leading to that. They all lead to that big question. The problem of evil, the problem of suffering, natural evil versus mortal evil. Why do people die? Why do people suffer? Why do bad things happen to quote-unquote good people? Hint, they don't. All those questions are really, I don't trust God. And getting to a place where you can comfortably move forward in theism is really learn to trust divinity and actually have that become something you can count on through your life. Not all at once. You can do the experiment. Get in the laboratory, do the experiment. Let the results speak for themselves. Grow it over time. It's not a black or white thing. Just got to have enough interest in the hypothesis to get out the gate, get in the laboratory and start working with it. But in a lot of ways, I look at life as a journey towards trusting in divinity and making that your life's work. Making that what you do, who you are. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called Mere Christianity. He's the guy who wrote The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. He wrote a book called Mere Christianity, where he talks about how he's sick of hearing about people who are Christian philanthropists or Christian do-gooders or Christian industrialists, and he wants to meet somebody who's merely Christian, where that's who they are. And Krishna's making this point: if you become merely a devotee, where that's who you are, and that's your life's work, that's enough. Perfection will attend to you. Everything will be made right. You'll make it through. You'll learn all the lessons you need to learn. You'll navigate. You'll glide through life. You'll become peaceful. I won't let you fall. Krishna says elsewhere, if you run with your eyes closed, I won't let you fall. How much confidence he has in us. How much trust Krishna places in us. The nature of interpersonal relationships is they go both ways. Generally, we think of God as being some kind of robot or vending machine who doles out salvation or what have you. But if our Maker endowed us with the ability to trust and love, and those things are the core of what makes us who we are, and are the most valuable things that exist, how could the divine not have those same attributes? And now you have a loving, trusting deity. And that relationship of trust, by its very definition, creates vulnerability. Because it's about future events that can't quite be calculated. But if Krishna's omniscient, then Krishna could know everything that's going to happen in the future, right? That's if you take it that the future is an illusion and everything already exists. But if free will is real, and it certainly seems to be, then the future exists as a totality of possibilities and potentialities, not as a set-in-stone fact. Which means that the future doesn't exist. And so Krishna omnisciently may be aware of all the things that could happen, but if you have free will, they haven't happened yet, and you're a factor in that. And so when Krishna places trust in us, there's a certain uncertainty in that as well, because it's just inherently what you're dealing with future tense events. Do you guys follow that? I don't know if you did or not, but it's too late in the game. I can't slow that one down and say it all over again. It made sense. It was coherent. So yeah, I think this is a cool pair of verses from the Gita where Krishna bets on us. Not blindly. It says, if you make me the focus of your life, that's enough. So it's a conditional statement. Krishna's not stupid. No need to blindly trust. But Krishna is setting up reasonable parameters for an intimate relationship of trust. And it's not just that we need to learn to trust Krishna. Krishna's also betting on us. And I think that reflecting on these verses, it creates love between you and the divine. It also creates responsibility for yourself. And it's a big part of becoming an adult soul and moving forward. It also uplifts all of your other relationships because you deal with the one primary one and everything else. You know, the rising tide raises all ships. I think it's beautiful theology. Subversive. Unusual. A deity who couldn't be vulnerable, couldn't love. A deity who wasn't affected by you would also be incapable of love. A full conception of divinity would require love, and that requires some of the more positive attributes that we normally associate with human beings inhering within the deity. Because not everything about us is bad. Thought, feeling, consciousness, will, desire, love. These don't appear to be deficiencies. They might be deficient in our iterations of them. But fundamentally, these features don't appear to be inherently faulty. And then as we approach Krishna and grow, we become Krishna conscious, which doesn't just mean we become conscious of Krishna, it means we start to become conscious like Krishna. And then we become capable of trusting other people and seeing the good in other people and seeing the good in the world and the good all around us and seeing the hope for everybody and not giving up on people and wishing people the best. Did you guys follow that? Okay. Instagram, thank you guys so very much. And Zoom and Facebook, thank you guys as well.